So good afternoon or good morning if it's morning where you are. My name is Jandel Crutchfields, and I will serve as your moderator for today's webinar. I'm currently beginning my 4th year here as an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Arlington School of Social Work. And here I engage in research on moving the helping professions, including social work, towards racial justice in sectors including education, health, and economics. And so on behalf of the 13th Grand Challenge National Steering Committee, I'm excited to say, bienvenidos, karibuni, yo gozo, bienvenue, or welcome to our guests who are joining us on Zoom and on Facebook. Today's webinar is both a beginning and an end. It's the end of a major planning initiative within the Grand Challenges, and it's the beginning of a dedicated series to the 13th Grand Challenge. So the purpose of the webinar today is to officially launch the Eliminate Racism webinar series. And so we hope today that you gain an awareness of the background of the 13th Grand Challenge, the importance to the field of social work and beyond, that you have a chance to engage with our esteemed speaker during the question and answer session, and that you have a chance to meet the fantastic members of the webinar planning committee and learn about upcoming webinars for this series. So before we begin, let us commit to first listen and then engage with one another today for what we hope will be an instructive session. Of course, no webinar would be complete without housekeeping notes. So here are a few housekeeping notes to ensure everybody has their best experience. So we're excited again to have two audiences. We're on Zoom and we're on Facebook, so we'll engage both during the webinar. Second, if you're wondering how you communicate with me as the moderator or with other speakers today, all Zoom attendees can communicate and interact in the chat box, which some of you are already doing. You can't go on camera or speak today, but you can use the chat box and the Q&A feature. So if you are looking at the control bar at the bottom of your screen, you have the chance to type in your own questions and to see other questions by attendees. And if somebody has the same or similar question as you can upvote the question. So that'll allow me as the moderator to determine which questions are the most popular among the audience, because we'll have just about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A today. So remember, the Q&A feature is a separate feature from the chat box. Be sure to enter any questions that you really have to have answered today in the Q&A feature. If you're a Facebook attendee, you can enter questions and thoughts in the comments section under the live video, and we'll be monitoring those as well. So that's it for housekeeping. Let me see if Dr. Teasley has joined us. He has. So first, we're going to hear about the development of the 13th Grand Challenge and some of that background. And we're going to hear that from the prolific Dr. Martell Teasley, who does not need an introduction. But for those who don't know, Dr. Teasley is the Dean of the University of Utah College of Social Work, the President of the National Association of Deans and Directors of Schools of Social Work, and the former Editor-in-Chief of the journal Children in Schools. His research primarily focuses on social work in school settings, particularly the vital role that social work can play in advancing educational equity. He's well known as an innovative and talented leader, and he also has experience as a substance use disorder counselor, time as a licensed practical nurse, and a decade of service with the U.S. Army. So Dr. Teasley, I can personally attest to your leadership and mentorship. And so we thank you for your service to the country and your continued service to the profession of social work. And so we'd love for you to share just a background of how all of this work has culminated in a 13th Grand Challenge, Eliminate Racism.
Well, thank you, Dr. Crutchfield. And I really want to thank the leaders, social work leaders who have put this together. And I want to thank Dr. Patricia Reid-Merritt for her work and her for her coming on today. And I don't know if she's known, but I met her in the past and in a panel she did with Dr. Karinga. But let me just say that the Grand Challenges have been around for a little over 5 years now. And initially, which is a great ideal for social work, it's an innovative project backed by science to try to take on some of the more pressing social welfare challenges within our country. And there are 12 of them. You can look at the American Academy of Social Work in their website, which talks about those 12 grand challenges. And there are different papers within each one of those sections. Initially, myself and a group of scholars got together back when the grand challenges started and basically said, hey, look, there's not a lot of discussion about race here. What we were told at the time, one, we were asked to write a paper, which I did on school success for African-American children as part of those 12 grand challenges. But we were also told that by the executive committee, and they were catching on themselves at the time, that race would be part of all of the grand challenges. And we didn't think that was enough. There still was a lot of clamoring, a lot of noise, a lot of pushback to include race itself as a grand challenge for the social work profession. And so as part of my leadership role as president of NAD, I was actually tasked to be part of the executive committee. And I basically came in the door basically saying that we need to have racism as a grand challenge for social work education. And then there was some clamoring about, the word, the number 13 as a grand challenge. I didn't mind that so much. If people remember, it was the 13th Amendment that so-called eliminated racism in this country. Also, Dr. King's stint as a civil rights leader was about 13 years, and there's other significance of 13 that I'll talk about in the book. And so after George Floyd, I think the executive committee at that time, with the push from myself and others, finally said, and then what had happened in COVID-19 with the disproportionality for minoritized groups, particularly African-Americans and our Latinx brothers and sisters, basically said, okay, we'll move forward with racism as a 13th grand challenge. Now, the thing is that we talk about race a lot, but the challenge is really the centrality of race itself. And by that, I mean that seeing race as a primary factor in shaping the lived experience of people and the circumstances that they live in. And I really want to hold up Dr. Patricia Reid-Merritt book. She has a 2-volume set on race in America, and it really deals with the centrality of race. It's an excellent piece, but the point is that social work had not taken on that challenge within the grand challenges. And so it's one thing to have racism as a variable, mediating and moderating factor, but it's another thing to see racism as a culprit, as forming social structural inequalities, as ideals about race and racism challenge our lives and set into motion policies that impact people and the way they live and that impact human behavior in the social environment. And so that's what the 13th grand challenge is about, to eliminate racism. Eliminating racism will be no easy task, as we know. It will take time, and it'll probably take much longer than any of us have on this earth. But we must continue to stay at it. There have been many things that people have attempted. For example, cancer. When I grew up, there was no cure to just about any cancer. And now there's cures to several types of cancer. And so racism is that way. It's a disease within our society, and we must take it on. We must be vigilant about it. I'll stop right there, but I invite you to look forward to the book on eliminating racism. Many of the people on this Zoom call today will be part of that text. And again, I want to say thank you to my friend and colleague, Dr. Alan Dutlaff, and I want to thank Dr. Patricia Reid-Merritt for signing on with us today. Thank you, Dr. Crutchfield.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Teasley, for giving us a background. So hopefully the audience understands that this is really the culmination of many efforts over several years to be able to get this 13th grand challenge. So that's the background. And so next we will hear about why such a grand challenge as this is needed for social work, building on what Dr. Teasley has shared. We will be given our charge for the webinar series by the distinguished Professor of Africana Studies and Social Work at Stockton University in Galloway, New Jersey, Dr. Patricia Reid-Merritt. So Dr. Reid-Merritt received the Doctorate of Social Work in Race, Law, and Social Policy from UPenn, the Master of Social Work from Temple University, and the Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Social Science from Cabrini College. She served as coordinator of the Africana Studies Program. She spearheaded the university's annual Fannie Lou Hamer Human and Civil Rights Symposiums and chaired the National Fannie Lou Hamer Statute Committee. Dr. Reid-Merritt is also the founder and artistic executive director of Afro-One Dance, Drama, and Drum Theater Incorporated. That's a community-based cultural and performing arts organization currently celebrating its 47th year of operation. Afro-One has been described as the cultural magnet for African-American youth, families, and the community in Southern New Jersey. Dr. Reid-Merritt has served as an educational and training consultant for inclusion, diversity, cultural sensitivity, race, racism, and anti-racism to colleges, universities, local school districts, businesses, state and city governments. Dr. Reid-Merritt is the author of numerous publications, as you saw Dr. Teasley hold up one. Others include the National Blackboard bestseller, Sister Power, How Phenomenal Black Women Are Rising to the Top. Sister Wisdom, 7 Pathways to a Satisfying Life for Soulful Black Women. Righteous Self-Determination, the Black Social Work Movement in America, and as we saw, Race in America, How a Pseudoscientific Concept Shapes Human Interactions. And that's just a few. A resident of Hamilton, New Jersey, Dr. Reid-Merritt is a well-known scholar and lecturer. She's presented scholarly papers and keynote addresses at numerous national and international conferences, including Kenya, Brazil, Egypt, France, South Africa, England, and Venezuela. She was the founding president of the Association of Black Women in Higher Education, the Philadelphia chapter, having served previously on the National Board of Directors. Additionally, she is the consultant on arts and culture to communities throughout the state of New Jersey. And of course, Dr. Reid-Merritt is also the recipient of numerous honors and awards. And so you can see it is an absolute honor for her to join us today. We're grateful for your presence, Dr. Reid-Merritt. We look forward to what you have to share. And again, we encourage audience members on Zoom and Facebook, cheer your agreement, raise thought-provoking commentary and questions. And we look forward to what you have to share. Dr. Reid-Merritt.
Dr. Crutchfield, thank you so much for that warm introduction. I hear it all and I wonder who wrote all that, but I guess I did. And that's why you had to share it with the audience. Dr. Teasley, again, thank you for all the work you've done. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this first series dealing with the grand challenge of eliminating racism. And I want to welcome all of you, social workers and non-social workers. I know there are a number of scholars in the field of Africana Studies who've also joined us, and other folks who are just interested in the topic that we're addressing today, which of course is the elimination of racism. I want to reinforce what Dr. Teasley said. You know, this is going to be a hard, difficult task. It is not something that we're going to probably be able to accomplish in our lifetimes, but like so many other things that we've been challenged with throughout the decades, this is something that we're going to persist and pursue in order to make certain that we do everything we can during this particular moment to begin to eliminate racism that affects America. I want to say one of the questions that I have to ask as we start this discussion is exactly what are we trying to do? And of course, the title pretty much says it all. We've come together to address some of the social ills and problems that have resulted from American racism. And I am talking about American racism, and that by no means suggests that racism is not a part of the developing nations throughout the world. But we are talking today about American racism and what it has meant to our country and what it has meant to us who are citizens of this nation. And I commend the organizers who, as Dr. Teasley indicated, more than 5 years ago said we need to deal with some challenges, but the insistence by he and others, and I know one of the members of that committee was Dr. Tony Oliver, who is past president of the National Association of Black Social Workers, who said we really need to address this issue, you know, of racism. Social worker needs to address that forthright. It needs to be a priority for us. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And so as we're now into the third decade of this new millennium, We have many other organizations in social work as well as schools of social work saying we're going to elevate this concern, to a priority. And again, it's a good thing, but it also speaks to the extent to which some organizations have been struggling with this issue for decades and decades and decades. I talked to my husband when I said, look, I got this call from some people out in Utah. I can't imagine who's out in Utah, but folks are out there. They say they want me to speak about, the elimination of racism. And he sort of looked at me and reminded me. He said, when you talk about you're going to eliminate racism, that's like trying to boil the ocean. It's a tremendous, tremendous challenge, and think about that. How would you boil the Atlantic Ocean? What would that be? And so it is a tremendous challenge. And I'm saying wow. How are we going to do that? What are we going to talk about? What's the conversation about when we say that we're going to deal with the working on the elimination of racism? And one of the things that I want to say is that American racism, as we know it, is certainly part of this country's 500-year history. And that is something that you have to accept as a starting point. That from the very beginning, the experiences that people have had in this nation has resulted in a social society, a nation, an organization that's really been built on the basis of white supremacy and the ideology of white supremacy. And so we see the beliefs and practices that have occurred in this nation that has really been the foundation of America. And I know there's a lot of pushback on that now, which I'll speak to a little bit later. But if we want to be clear and accurate, if we want to focus on the real history of what has happened in this country, then you have to focus on the questions around race and racism. And as Dr. Teasley held up one of my publications, which talked about race in America, how a pseudoscientific concept shaped human interaction, it's very, very clear from all the people who contributed to that work that race has been a part of virtually every single thing. It's helped build our economy. It's established our legal system. It's built our social institutions. It's been part of our values, part of our morals, part of our beliefs. It's been based on a racial hierarchy. And when we talk about race, yes, people have said there's only one race, there's the human race. Yeah, we all know that is true, but we also know that the human race is not monolithic. And that means there are different categories of people belonging to different groups in the human race. I've heard people argue, if we stop talking about race and just say human race, this would not be a problem. Yes, it would, because we would label the groups as something else. We wouldn't call them racial groups. We'll call them, bugger groups, honey groups, sugar groups, whatever we want to call. But people do belong to different groupings, of the human species. And so when we talk about race, we understand that when we say race and we're dealing with race, we know that in America, to be born white has been advantageous, but to be born as a person of color has been a decided disadvantage. And that's the true history that we have to deal with in this country. And I'm sure most of you, especially those of you who are in the profession, are fully aware of the history of American racism, especially as it has to do with African Americans. Somewhere in your educational background, they told you about the disproportionate burden that people of African descent have had to bear as a result of American racism. You know about enslavement. You know about things like the exploited labor of enslaved people, the Holocaust, during the Holocaust of enslavement. You know about the brutalization, victimization, the cultural deterioration of people of African descent. As part of American history, we know that has been our experience. But what we also know is that we have not been the only victims of American racism. When we talk about American racism, we're not just talking about the experience that has happened with African descended folks, Black folks. It's far beyond that. We know too about the experience of the Native Americans, the indigenous people who live here, what they lost. They lost their land, they lost their life, they lost their culture. They lost the opportunity to fully participate in American society, to share in the wealth, to share in the resources. They lost that. We talk about the people who are also the indigenous people from places like Mexico, who've been battered back and forth across the line. Sometimes here being determined that, oh, you're members of the white race. Other times it being determined, well, you're that other white. And then in other times, no, we decided that you're people of color, always based on a racial hierarchy. What they knew in their experience, that they were never truly American white. and that their disproportionate representation in poor communities, dealing with poor employment, dealing with poor health, had an awful lot to do with the fact that they were deemed as a less than worthy racial group in America. And certainly we all know about the experiences, particularly the recent experiences that have been resulted from people attacking people of Asian American descent. We know that that has always been a problem in America as well. They too were exploited for their labor. They too were forced to live in sort of isolated, segregated communities. And while their experiences are much varied, whether or not we're talking about Japanese or Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese or Indian people, what we know is that they share one thing in common, is that people do not view them as members of the white community. And not being a member of the white community carries certain sort of disadvantages in the United States of America. And so, what do we know? We know America is a unique place. It is by certainly, first and foremost, it is the most racially, ethnically, culturally diverse nation in the world. That is absolutely true. And we know that we have had the experience of having people come to this nation from all different parts of the world. And so a lot of people sometimes see America as sort of the ideal place to be. But I have traveled in virtually every state in this country. And I have also researched every single state in this country. And I can tell you definitively, there are no racist-free zones in America. It doesn't matter where you live or where your history of your state, whether you're in the North, the South, the Northwest, or the East. There's a history of racist policies. There's a history of racist practices, sometimes very clearly documented in the history books and in the literature of people who focus on what has been the actual experience of people from different racial groups living in these places. You all know about the South. When we think about racism in America, I think we immediately go to the South. Fair or unfair, but we go to the South. We go to the South, we think about Jim Crow, we think about the Ku Klux Klan, we think about lynching, we think about bombings, we think about segregation, we think about white terrorism. All that is true. We think about what happens in places like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and North South Carolina and Arkansas and Arizona. Yep, all of that is true. But the South is not the only racist region in this country, nor has it ever been. And so you have to go to the West Coast and the East Coast and find out, well, were you engaged in these racist practices too? And the answer, I assure you, is absolutely yes. And again, making these statements clearly comes from my research, a state-by-state history of race and racism in the United States. And so, yeah, they had lynchings in other part of the country too. They had Ku Klux Klan and terrorist organizations in other parts of the country like Maine, Montana, North Dakota. Those places had problems too. They had miscegenation or anti-miscegenation laws throughout the nation. Almost every state in our country passed laws that made it illegal for people to marry people of a different racial group. They had all those laws too. And whether or not they did not have necessarily the de jure, meaning by law, practices that you had during the Jim Crow South, they had de facto practices. People knew that racially they were allowed some places, other places they weren't allowed. Some of you probably watched that series, Lovecraft Country, which was an exciting sort of series to watch. And they talked about, very beginning of the series, what it was like for Black people to enter into a sundown town. Did sundown towns exist? Absolutely, yes, they did. Places where you couldn't be caught in town once the sun went down. Were there all kinds of violations of human and civil rights in these places all over the country? Absolutely, yes. Those kinds of things occurred too. I'm from the Northeast, and we have an abundance of de facto discrimination, racial discrimination that has gone on in our state. I'm right now living in the state of New Jersey. Actually, I've been here for quite a while now. One of the things that we often talk about at Stockton University is the experience that people in Atlantic City had and the people who came from Philadelphia, which is where I was born, large metropolitan area. When they would go to the beach or the shore, as they call it here, when they would go to the shore in Atlantic City, you knew which beach not to show up on. You knew places you weren't supposed to go. And you knew that there was a designated area, which has been labeled for historical purposes, Chicken Bone Beach is where Black people belong. And you didn't go beyond Chicken Bone Beach. You didn't go to the other places in the shore. What you knew and understood is that was the only place that Black people could go. Did you have a law? No, we didn't have laws, but we definitely had de facto racial discrimination, de facto racial segregation here. And all of those things, of course, have had an impact no matter where you are, no matter where you live. You know, California had its experience, multiple experience with denying opportunity to people from Asian American groups, certain people from Black groups, completely people from indigenous populations, everywhere across the country. And so when we talk about this as a problem of national significance, yes, indeed it is. Yes, indeed it is. And there have to be ways in which we attempt to deal with the problems of American racism. I want to say that certainly the group of social workers who developed these grand challenges and especially insisted upon the 13th, you know, accolades to them again. But people have been working on the issue of eliminating racism for an awfully long period of time. As Dr. Teasley said, don't you think that was the intent when they passed the 13th Amendment, 14th and 15th Amendment? Don't you think that was intent when they had the first golden age of civil rights advancement during Reconstruction? Yes. When all of the organizations began to organize themselves, whether it was in 1908 or 09 with the NAACP, the Urban League followed, don't you think that part of what they said, whether explicitly or implicitly, is that we got to eliminate racism? And then there have been other organizations that made that statement in 1968, more than 50 years ago, when the founding, the National Association of Black Social Workers was founded. Very clearly stated in their principles was, we're going to fight for the elimination of racism in the social welfare system, period, especially in child welfare. When Gwendolyn Calvert Baker was president of the YWCA, stated as one of their 10 goals, the elimination of racism. You know, people were very clear, we're fighting this thing. They were also very clear that progress would be slow, it would be incremental, and as already been alluded to, we're going to be at this for a very, very long period of time. So the question might be, you know, well, what are we going to do today? What's our challenge today? What's going to make a difference? What's going to make a difference at this moment? And I'm referring to this moment because I want to say in this past year, we have had a moment. We have had a critical moment in civil rights history. We had a critical moment in the advancement of consciousness, which everybody's describing as woke now. For people who are concerned about the violation of human and civil rights, the brutalization of Black people, especially Black men by the police force. Yeah, we've had a moment. This moment has been powerful. Some people have described the galvanization of other people after the murder of George Floyd as one of the largest galvanizations of folks in the civil rights movement, period. Even larger than what we had during the 1960s and the 70s. And also they point to the fact that's important for you to know. These weren't just Black people. They were Black people, white people, Asian people, Latin people, old people, young people. They were from all over the place. And there was a period of time last summer where it seemed like the nation was completely woke. And they were saying, we have had enough of this. And yes, I celebrated being a part of that moment. But that moment is dissipating. That moment is fading. That's a moment that happens with so many other moments in our history. The civil rights movement and human rights movement here in this country is more or less cyclical. Every 30 or 40 years or so, you know, we have this tremendous galvanization of energy where people are saying we have to do something. You can take it as far back as what occurred, you know, during the Civil War. You can discuss what happened during Reconstruction, the Progressive Era. You can even discuss what happened, you know, during the New Deal, you know, where we're going to make things more equal for people. You certainly know that we had this moment without a shadow of a doubt in the modern day civil rights moment in the 1960s and the 1970s, and even in the 1990s, when we had our first experience with what it was like to see in a recording the brutalization of Black people, the Rodney King incident. You know that every 30 or 40 years or so, people said we got to do something. Well, we were having our moment last summer. And as many people as we brought into consciousness, there were also people who were opposed what we were doing. And so now we have less than a year later. What are we dealing with now? We're dealing with a situation where today's challenges are different from what they have been in the past, but they are located on the same continuum. The same continuum we have been engaged in decade after decade in regards to fight for liberation, freedom, civil and human rights, located on the same continuum. But what do we have now? Some of you are familiar with Kendi's work, and Ibram Kendi and other scholars that talk about it's no longer enough to say I'm not a racist. That's no longer enough. You have to decide you're going to be an anti-racist. An anti-racist is different because an anti-racist is the person that really understands that you have to take conscious, progressive actions in order to deal with the problem of American racism. You have to be part of this new cadre of warriors that decide that we're going to do things that fight American racism and do things to help eliminate racism in our society, in our communities, etc. And so we've had a reaction to that. And I'm sure you've been watching the news. And you have to ask yourself, what is frightening America right now? And it's this notion that you have all these new quote unquote woke people who have decided that they're going to be warriors. They're going to be warriors in the fight against racism. And so what do we have now? We have a group of what I describe as liars and deniers who are taken to the airwaves every night and they have everything negative to say about this current movement towards recognizing that race and racism here in this country has been a problem. You've been following the news. You know that states all across the nation, mainly publicly led states, are passing legislation that says you will not teach critical race theory in our schools. Even though I'm sure they know what critical race theory is. Even though I'm in K-12 grades, most people had no notion of teaching critical race theory. They may have been teaching about the history of racism in America. I'm not using the lens of critical race theorists, which is really sort of, a legal concept that was developed where people would say, you have to look at the ways in which race shaped the legal system and how racism is embedded in our legal system. But people have jumped on the bandwagon. You've seen people at Board of Education meetings storming out, saying, you will not teach my white children to hate themselves. Who said that? Who said that? But that's the propaganda that's out there. And it's almost, you've seen the attacks on the military the last few days, where people are saying, how dare you expose the military to this race stuff? How dare you not? How dare you not help people understand that race is a fundamental factor in the United States? It is a factor that influences everybody's life, whether you're white, black, person of color, whatever. One would have to learn what is the accurate history. And we know that teaching about race and racism is something that must occur in our country. You might ask me, other people may wonder. And so what are we supposed to do? What are you doing? How do we begin to counter this? And I have in this past year been saying it's all about the AE and the AE. I remember being part of a webinar last summer with Dr. Santi, Dr. Karinga, and a number of other scholars from across the nation. And I said during that webinar, look, just remind yourself, you got to have a plan. My plan is the AE is the AE. Chant that to yourself and remember when you're out there that you got something you can fall back on. And the first A is we got to acknowledge what's happening. You can't deal with the issue if you don't acknowledge that it's a problem. Now, there's been some acknowledgement. Along with that acknowledgement is pushback, absolute pushback. Hopefully you've been reading about Biden's effort, the new administration's effort to do something about past discrimination. How are we going to level the field? How are we going to deal with leveling the field? Biden had a proposal that we have to begin to provide some programming compensation to Black farmers who've been denied and discriminated against for decades, if not a whole century. The moment they went to implement that program, white farmers protested. White farmers say, I'm a victim here. Biden administration also attempted to say the pandemic has hit women and people of color extremely hard. We have to provide them with some additional grant support. Before they had the ink dried on a check, which they never did get to sign the checks. White businesses said, no, I'm a victim. If you offer that to Black people and not to me, or to Asian people and not to me, I'm a victim. And so, no, you can't do that. There's a piece in the New York Times today that talked about the extent to which what we have now is new discrimination, new racism. And you know what the new racism is, according to their point of view? It's the fact that people are trying to fix the old racism with the new racism, meaning that they've identified a population that's been victimized and they're trying to do something to compensate. And that in and of itself is racist. That's the argument. Or what they did, or what they said during our time, remember the whole affirmative action initiative. We have to have affirmative action. People say, oh no, that is reverse racism. I go back to the A and I tell you, if you can't acknowledge that there is a problem, you can't possibly fix it. The E is that educate. You have to educate yourself. I was amazed at the number of people who said to me 2 weeks ago, when they were doing the anniversary and all the programming about what happened during the racial massacre in Tulsa. I was surprised at the number of highly educated people who said, well, I never heard of Tulsa. I never heard of that. Oh, but I'm not surprised. They were educated in American school systems. And so why tell people about what has been the horrific past in our country in regards to the way in which race has caused people, their life? You have to educate yourself about what the issues are. I was on a webinar yesterday, and the person said the difference with now is that for the first time, people are talking about systemic racism, and they're actually saying in their advertisement and things, we need diversity. I said, no. That's not new. In the 1960s and 70s, we called it something different. We said it was institutional racism. It was the same thing. We said racism was embedded in the system. In the 1960s and 70s, and when I went to school of social work, we talked about cultural diversity, cultural sensitivity. We talked about the same thing. And so what we're seeing now, and again, is part of this cycle, it's part of this moment. But people need to educate themselves to find out what went on in the past, so we know what to do in the future. And that second A is, we have to be advocates, but we have to take action. I agree with all of the African-centered scholars that say it is not enough for you to be non-racist. You have to be an action-oriented anti-racist. What are you gonna do? Some of you probably took to the streets last summer. Some of you may have signed a petition. Some of you may have decided, I'm gonna help register people to vote. Some of you may have said, I'm gonna run for office. I got to do something. Some of you may have confronted people in the moment. When you heard their racist comments and said, no, I think that's racist and this is why. And so one of the things that I say when you take action, if you see something, you have to make it known. You have to make it known. You can't walk around and silently act as if it's not there. And we know from history, if we don't make it known, no one else will. And that last E is that, and this is a word that I know you social workers are familiar with, you have to remain engaged. And when I say engaged, I mean fully engaged. This is no sprint. You got to be in this for the long run. And when I say that more than 50 years ago, NABSW made the declaration that we're going to fight racism in the child welfare system, I've been a member of the organization for at least 48 years. 48 years. That's how long I've been engaged in this battle. That's how I could write all the textbooks and books that I've written on race and racism. You got to be in it for the long run. And it has to be, as I say, full court press. You can't half-ass do this because it's going to take all of your energy. And what's going to happen? People are going to come after you. People are going to attack you. People are going to accuse you of being racist. They're going to say all kinds of things that attempt to diminish you. And your question to me might be, well, what am I supposed to do? Find your support group before you go out into the street and join the forces. Make sure you join the organizations that are fighting against racism. Make sure that you associate with people who consciously say and openly say, I'm in this battle against racism. Make sure that the community has your back. You might be in an institution that you think it's all lovey-dovey here, but I know that's not true. And so even at the institutions where they make these proclamations that we're committed to diversity, we're committed to inclusion, we're committed to a non-racist environment. After you're there for a while, you know how much of a struggle that is. And so what I say to you is that when you see something, you got to make it known. And once you make it known, you got to take action. And you must make certain that you are engaged with other folks who are as committed as you are to working on the elimination of American racism. Because as my husband reminded me, it reminded me, it's going to be like trying to boil the ocean. Asani Santa.
All right, what a charge, everybody. From Dr. Reid-Merritt. We have to give her our virtual applause right now. You can probably hear me, so look, I'm I'm unmuted, so I'll give my real applause. This says update. There are no questions yet from those who are watching on Facebook. Okay, so we do want to open it up for questions, answers, comments for Dr. Reid-Merritt, who's just prolific way of summing up, hundreds of years of history, action, calling us to all of these things. While people are thinking of questions, I had one, and so other committee members, if you guys have follow-ups or questions, that might be a way to get the conversation started. But I thought it was great. You talked about acknowledging an offense or something that's racist right in the moment, right? And I know that's a catching point for people that are trying to identify themselves as anti-racist. If you have 100 examples, can you pick one, right, from yourself, whether it's a colleague, whether it's somebody in the community where you have tried to do that, or that's an example, and you live like to see the next day, right? I think people feel like sometimes it might be the end of the world to stop someone and say, hey, this is not right. This is actually a racist action. How did that work out? How did that shake out?
Unfortunately, I have hundreds of experiences.
That's what I was thinking.
And I'm not the only one to have hundreds of experiences. And I'll give you one example. When I wrote my first book, Sister Power, How Phenomenal Black Women Are Rising to the Top, it was sort of, in very many ways, an overnight sensation. I mean, I was shocked as everybody else. It was my first book, I didn't know that people were interested in empowering Black women. And when I started the research for the book, I remember computers were relatively new then. The internet thing was relatively new. And I put the words power and Black women into a search, one of the search engines, and it came up blank. It's like, power and Black women, those kinds of things can go along. And so I did this research. I went all over the country. I talked to all these powerful Black women and, wrote this book. And all of a sudden overnight, it was like, wow, Black Boy bestseller #1, yes. And so they put me on book tour, which was a great thing, put me on book tour. And I ended up in New York City. And when I arrived in New York City, of course, they got the limousines waiting for you, the signs, Dr. Reid-Merritt, yeah, that's me, this is all the stuff. They take me to the Brooklyn Museum. And at Brooklyn Museum, they got this giant poster. It has to be about 20 feet. My picture's hanging on it, the photo of the book's hanging on it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a star, I've arrived, I'm here, okay? And so I was walking down the street, and someone stopped me on the street, said, wait, aren't you that lady that was on Good Day? I said, yep, that's me. Someone else said, I think I heard you on the radio. Yep, you're right, that's me. And so at the end of the day, I was totally exhausted. I had been on book tour for about 3 weeks, I guess. And they put me up in the Writers Hotel in New York. It was where all the writers stayed, the legitimate people. And actually, when I walked into the hotel, I saw Maya Angelou seated in the lounge having a drink. And, I'm a sophisticated person. It's a little late in the day. I'm tired. I know there's a concierge lounge somewhere. Go get me a drink or something. Just chill out. I'll walk up to the lounge. The woman walks me. She greets me and she says, excuse me, are you lost? I said, no. She said, well, do you work here? And at that moment, I said, she see a Black woman with braids, which means I have no business coming into the concierge lounge trying to get a free drink. And I responded to her, it's no, and this was a little tacky, I do not work here. No, I'm not lost. I stay here and probably doing far better than you are as the person who's the host, at this lounge here. And while I didn't say, and you're a racist, she understood that I was responding to the fact that she responded to me as a Black woman with braids that just assumed that I'm not at your station. I've had hundreds of, and the reason why I tell that story, it didn't matter that all day long I had been celebrated and treated like a celebrity. At the end of the day, I was still a sister with braids. And that's what people see, and that's what people respond to. And so you always have to be on guard to correct people, to let them know, I'm not who you think I am. And what you're saying is really a reaction of your racist views that a person like me has no business at a place like this. And again, I would say too many too many examples where you have to respond to people and confront people and let them know, why are you making this reaction to me? And if your question also, does that happen in the professional setting? Yes, yes. And dealing with your colleagues is a scary thing, especially if you're a non-tenured person. Fortunately for me, I've always been in all this situation where I was sort of like the first one, this first one, that. I remember going to Stockton and I was the first Black female there to get tenure and promoted and all that stuff. And so every time I started to make noise, in some ways people were a little resistant to respond in a way that was too harsh. So I got to be bold. I got to be a person that say, y'all have a problem. And here's my last example. 3 years ago, Stockton University received an award for excellence in diversity. They received a national award. I got on my computer, started typing out, saying, who the heck gave you this award? What are you talking about? Where are all the Black folks? What has happened to the Black faculty, the Black staff, Black students? I can't imagine that you're celebrating diversity. And it was a rather heated letter that I sent to everybody on the campus. I can tell you the atmosphere was chilly. When I walked up and down the halls, people didn't want to look at me. You know how when you send out an email to the whole campus, everybody responds? It was like zero, right? And so how could I do that? Well, hey, look, I'm already a distinguished professor. And as one of my colleagues told me, if you get to be in a position, and he said full professor, he said you have one responsibility, and that is to kick, and you know the rest of that sentence. That's your responsibility. Because at that point, you can't be harmed like you could be. And so for those of you on the way up, I understand. You still have to be able to confront those issues. I understand. And you have to be true to yourself, and you have to be willing to take risks. I mean, I've taken risks all of my career. Have I paid the price sometimes? Yes, yes, and double yes. But I knew it was what I had to do. And if somebody else's question is, how do you get that way? I was born at the right time. I was born in the midst of the movement. When I came of age at 17, 18, I would turn on the radio and I was listening to Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution will not be televised. I didn't know that wasn't true. I thought the revolution is coming. It's going to be in North Philadelphia. I'm going to have bus fare. I got to get there because the revolutions, I did not know that wasn't true. But what did happen during that period of time, and especially as I entered higher education, is that I could protest and there was a movement on the street. And in the movement on the street, allowed me to protest and allowed me to do the things that I wanted to do. And when people came after me,
Dr. Reid-Merritt, no, you didn't. I just wanted to, there are some good questions coming up. So I wanted to make sure we get a few because we're almost at 10 minutes left. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. This was a question that talked about Black, Indigenous people of color being tired of teaching by example. How do you address the problem of always having to teach others? That's a burden. That's one of the panel, not one of the audience members says that. So having to do the teaching.
I think it can be a burden, but I don't think you have a choice. I think if you're consciously aware what the situation is, you don't have a choice. I know there's been some discussion in the past about many people, you know, Black folk and other people of color feel it's not my responsibility to teach all these other folks what they should do and how they should do it and what their view should be. And while that is true, the other part of that is that if you're going to be an activist, you don't really have a choice. The other possibility is that you sit there and say, I see that you got a problem, or I see that the system has a problem, but I'm just going to let it pass. And so my position is, if you're one of the warriors, and I am one, you just don't have a choice.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think these are similar. Dr. Teasley, you can correct me. So Dr. Teasley's asking, given your experiences, what's the biggest challenge within the social work profession in the elimination of racism? And then Helen McDonald is also saying, what are 2 key ways to keep the elimination of racism at the forefront of everything? So those are kind of together. Maybe what's stopping it from being at the forefront and how do we keep it at the forefront?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that while you have this group of educators and practitioners saying this is something that we need to make a priority, keep in mind that they had to bring it to the forefront after the other 12 challenges were established. I don't think that this is a priority for the profession. I think that the profession has always sort of come a little bit through the back door rather than being a leader when you talked about challenging race and racism. And of course, you know, social work is an American profession. We've had our own experience with race and racism. We've had discrimination at our agencies, in our schools, those sorts of things. So I think a challenge remains that, you know, while the profession is a profession that's committed and dedicated to working with people in the margins and people who are underserved and underutilized, et cetera, I doubt that most members of the profession would say, and yes, my commitment from here on out is that racism, fighting against racism is going to be my #1 priority. It's not going to happen.
Gotcha. Okay. There's a question from Dr. Trina Shanks. Are many disparate actions movements enough, or is it necessary to have a more collective movement plan that many groups and people galvanize behind?
I think that you do have collective plans, but they're just moments. They are brief moments in the ongoing struggle. That's the point I was making earlier about what happened last year, where everybody seemed they were organized and supportive of the Black Lives Matters movement. But, you know, again, it was a moment. It's not going to last. I think that you're always going to have separate groups of people doing different kinds of things. And there's no reason to assume that you need one particular approach to deal with the problem as great and as massive and expansive as American racism. And so you need multiple groups doing multiple things. And the other thing that I want to say about that is different groups have had different experiences with American racism. And so for some of those groups, they want to lead their own battle, their own charges. They have their own issues that they want to pursue. And so we need different groups. And on the other hand, from time to time, we'll have what looks like to be a very organized initiative.
All right, thank you. So we have a few more questions, but we also have more in the webinar. So I'm going to ask this one. And so if you can give a brief answer, we'll be able to get to the next one. So from Facebook, a user, advice to the youth of today, right? A lot of those young people that were involved in the movement over the summer and see it dissipating. This person says, what advice would you give to the youth?
Take to the streets. Take to the streets again. There's nothing more frightening than seeing a bunch of young people in the streets protesting. And so there will be some other protests this summer. It won't be like last summer. But when you see organized efforts to make a public protest, join. That's what you should do, join. Youth are at the place in their lives and their development. They don't have to risk as much as those of us who are trying to have careers or working on families, et cetera. And so while you're young, take advantage of it. And keep in mind that the movements of the past have been led by young people. So take to the street, it's your time. This is your moment and this is your time.
Great answer. All right, so this is gonna be our last question. So we can definitely respect folks' time and get off at 1. So this is talking about specialty work. And I think the profession has been criticized in the past in terms of focusing on, right, that clinical aspect. This person asks, is there any way to keep this eliminating racism as a priority while focusing on whatever the social worker's specialty is? Do you think anti-racism efforts are lost because of the focus on a particular social worker's specialty?
Oh, no, I think absolutely not. I mean, if you're in clinical practice, are there issues dealing with race and racism in clinical practice? Yes. You're in community organization, are there? Yes. If you're in leadership, yes. Management, yes. Education, yes. I don't think there's an area. I said earlier, there are no racist-free zones in America, no racist-free states. I don't think there's any aspects of our social interactions that have not been touched by American racism. And so I do not see that as a problem.
Fantastic answer. Okay. So never mind, I heard you say last question. I'm sorry, Brittany. I know Q&A was short, and when you have a dynamic speaker, right, you want to get all of these questions in, but we just want to thank you so much again for being the speaker for the launch of this series. I think you have given us so much encouragement in the work to make it steadfast and to continue the work. And so we just want to thank you again so much from the committee again. And so we
again,
Thank you for being here. So I wanted to be able to introduce to you guys briefly the committee members who've made this webinar and the upcoming webinars possible. So dedication, hard work is an understatement. For me, it's really the ease with which this team has worked to bring this to you. So the subcommittee members are Joanne Lunsford, Terrence Fitzgerald, my co-chair Quincy Bloxam, Dale Maglalang, and Alan Detlaf. And so each of us are spearheading the upcoming webinars in this series, right? So we're going to briefly share how our respective grand challenges are intersecting with race. And so you'll see on this slide where you can join again, depending on your interest. We hope you can join as many as possible, but there's another one coming up on July 13th. And so Joanne, if you'll go ahead and just share a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jandel. My name is Joanne Lunsford, and I will be hosting the Promote Smart Decarceration and Achieve Equal Opportunity and Justice upcoming webinar and how it intersects with the Eliminating Racism. So exciting. I'm hoping you all can enjoy, join us. There will be a panel discussion of about 6 persons, and they're going to talk about eliminating racism, what it has to do within the prison system, probation and parole, as well as some of the exciting new initiatives that's going on in Franklin County, Ohio. It's a spotlight on Franklin County, Ohio, that's doing some wonderful work, and how they have declared racism as a public health issue, declaring Juneteenth as a countywide holiday, creating a new innovation lab, doing interesting things with education, as well as the decarceration movement to help with promoting the elimination of racism and creating an equal opportunity and justice for everyone in all those fields. So it's a wonderful time. Look forward to having you. Spread the word, show up, and enjoy all the information you're going to get.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'll be spearheading the August 10th webinar. And so we know systemic racism has contributed to a persistence of race-based gaps that manifest in many different economic indicators, right? And so the starkest divides are in measures of household wealth, centuries of white privilege that have made it more difficult for people of color to achieve economic security. So at the August 10th webinar, we'll outline in more detail what those divides are and provide evidence from organizations that are working to promote financial capability and assets for all. So we hope you can join that one. All right, so next up, I think it's Terrence.
Yes, we'll be talking about, wait a minute, which one was I again? October. Can anyone hear me? Jindal, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, what month was I?
I think you're September.
Oh, okay, yes. Ending homelessness and eradicating social isolation. So definitely looking at the intersectionality of race along the lines of what we've done and what we should be doing in terms of ending homelessness and eradicating social isolation, looking at the racial components.
All right, thank you, Quincy B.
Thanks, Jandel. I will be presenting on and around creating social responses for a changing environment and harnessing technology for social good. Specifically paying really close attention to work that we were doing on the ground as community organizers with experience and degrees in social work to actually be able to get some of the most vulnerable individuals in our communities connected to not only the devices and services they needed, but also the information that is attached to those. So I'll have a bunch of different advocates from different disciplines to really highlight how important it is to not work in silos and to understand the historical perspectives upon which many of the things that we're seeing today is actually built. So I'm looking forward to it and hoping all of you join us again.
Great. Dale.
Thank you. So on November 9th, we'll be addressing closing the health gap. So this webinar will discuss how systemic racism has contributed to health inequities and health gaps in communities of color in research and practice. And it will also feature the work of a community health center in Boston that is using an anti-racist framework among high school students to raise their critical consciousness towards health liberation for all. Thank you.
Fantastic. And our esteemed colleague, Alan.
Thanks, Jindal. So our last webinar on December 14th will focus on how racism contributes to the racist inequities that exist in interpersonal violence, child maltreatment, other forms of family violence. And we'll look at how societal racism and inequities contribute to violence, as well as the racism that exists in carceral systems, including the police, prisons, child welfare, how those systems contribute to and perpetuate violence against Black and Brown children and families. And then we'll look at how we as social workers can move away from our support of carceral systems and instead support non-carceral responses to violence that move away from punishment and incarceration and instead focus on transformative justice and liberation.
All right, so as you see, there is a lot in store for the rest of the year. And so we hope you mark your calendars. We hope to see you again on the 13th of July, which is in just 2 short weeks. And so we want to thank again the Grand Challenges for Social Work, the UTA School of Social Work who's hosting the webinars. And I have to thank again the webinar committee, Dr. Teasley for your leadership, Dr. Mike Spencer I want to mention, and then Kira Silk is on for your support as well. Any final comments from the committee? No. All right. There's lots of other comments in the chat. So we're officially done. We hope to see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sorry, Jandel, just really quickly. There were additional questions and comments coming in. I'm sure we're going to save the chat, but also for any questions that didn't get asked or getting more connected to the network, you can email me at the email that I just put in the chat box.
Yeah, okay.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much. So Quincy, if you guys have other questions, even about how to get connected to this work, thanks, Quincy. So it is Quincy.
I know, Jandel, and sorry, they just asked, do they need to fill out forms for each webinar? Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you address how they would be able to attend the different webinars.
Yes, so that's great. So the registration for each webinar will come. Hopefully you guys heard about this one through the flyer. There'll be another flyer for the July 13th webinar, another one for August 10th, September 9th, and so on. So it will be a different registration link so we can track who's been joining us at the webinars. That's why we've got this committee. Any other questions?
I did the link for the July 13th one in the chat. So the link to register for July 13th is in the chat if anyone needs.
Perfect. Thanks, Coral. So the link for part 2, July 13th, is already available and it's in the chat now. So you can register today. All right. Okay, thanks everybody. We appreciate it. I'll stop the share. And Coral, I think we're done.